In a world filled with conflict, in a universe comprised of differences, there's one thing that absolutely everything shares in common. We all exist. Including two guys named Jack and Michael, who like to chat about that very thing over a good cup of coffee. Let's pay them a visit, shall we?
Existence Brewing.
Podcast. Tale of two podcasters. Oh man. Hey, Jack, what's going on, my man?
Oh, what's up? I hear you humming our song.
Oh, I can't get it out of my head.
In a land of tales and rhymes, two podcasters rose in ancient times.
I've just been listening to it. It's been on repeat.
Strong and minds so keen. Jack Hansen and Michael Elliott, a legendary team.
I really think she hit it. She just nailed it.
Yeah, I don't want to be an ageist, but the only thing I would take some umbrage to is the rising in ancient times thing. I mean, I'm not that old. We're not that old.
It makes it sound like days of lore.
Yeah, I suppose that's the idea. And before you know it, our birth years will be ancient times.
Yeah, it will be.
Unless they keep making Stranger Things.
Here's 1984. Which was a good year.
So I had seen the first, have you ever seen that? Stranger Things?
Mm-mm. Oh, yeah. No, I did. I actually really liked that show.
Yeah, I had seen the first two seasons when they came out, and then the ex-wife was the big TV watcher, and so after our split, I didn't have a TV for like 5 years, and then the new girlfriend gets me a TV and says, no, I can't live with you or even come over to visit unless you have a TV.
Right.
And so I thought, oh boy, here we go. So, but it's, in some ways it's been nice to catch up. And so, and in others, it's like, God, I'm watching too much TV. I really should be doing something else that is more challenging for the brain that I've been given and, supplied with to do something more than anyway. But, so I relived the first two seasons, which I'd already seen, and kind of went back and remembered some of it, didn't remember other parts of it. And then I'm just now like catching up on season 3, just finished that, and we'll start season 4. Anyway, she jumped in at season 3, and so I want to watch it with you since you haven't seen these seasons. See, isn't that lovely? Don't you love it? Like when your significant other does that. It's like, oh, you've already seen this. Well, then go ahead and watch it by yourself. Well, you haven't seen this? Well, I have. I'll watch it with you.
Yeah.
It's just like, I like knowing what's going to happen and seeing your reaction. So, but boy, I mean, you talk about just drenched in nostalgia. I was kind of going through line by line in my head today. How would I write this? Because it's almost, I don't know if it's by accident or if it's by design, the number of things that they borrow from that are from the 80s. I mean, some of it is just purely the setting, and then they just really steep the surroundings in everything from New Coke to Back to the Future to, all kinds of things that were actual things. But then they also, I wonder sometimes how many movies they actually borrowed from, like I said, with intent, and how many they borrowed from accidentally. Anyway, season 3, I must say, and I know I'm like antiquated as hell. Here's the ancient times. It's like, hey, Jack Hansen's just now watching season 3 of Stranger Things. Wow. I mean, it's 6 years later, but yeah, it's just lots. There's a lot going on. Lots of nostalgia. So I'm drenched in the 80s, and I usually live that way anyway, being a child. I mean, I was born in the 70s, but it's like I was telling my girlfriend, I said, these kids' age is just about perfect. Like I was just about the age of those kids where they started in the first season in 1983, and then moving on, it's sort of like progressively I would be that age at the time in real life from the show back then. So Kind of interesting, but anyway.
I really have always loved that about Jack Hansen. And for those of you who don't know him personally the way I do, he is kind of like a time traveler. If you were to take somebody from 1986 and just drop them in the middle of this era, I mean, you would get Jack Hansen. He loves the 80s. He loves everything about the music. I love that about him. And how do you think they did with their and there were very subtle 80s references. They weren't like overdoing it to where you felt like they were really trying to hit home the fact that, oh no, this is in the 80s. What do you think?
Well, I thought season 1, they didn't overdo it. And I thought in season 2, they did it a little bit more. And then season 3 is just, like I said, a geyser of just 80s nostalgia. It's just, it's almost too much in some ways. I mean, I think I haven't even turned to my girlfriend. We were watching one of the episodes and I said, even living in the 80s like I did at the children's age that were watching at the time, it wasn't this 80s. Like I lived it and it wasn't this 80s.
Right.
I mean, especially the soundtrack. I mean, man, did they up the soundtrack ante for season 3 and then all the other things. And some of it, so I'm looking for incongruous pieces throughout. And the only thing that I spied, and I think it was probably a localized thing, but we didn't have it here. I do not remember this from the 80s here. And it was in the background of a scene after they'd broken into the supermarket to get supplies and, sundries and things for their big quest, to kill the mind flayer, which, by the way, I kind of hate Stranger Things for bringing into ubiquity, because as an original Dungeons and Dragons player of the 80s myself, the Mind Flayer was my favorite monster from all the monsters, truly. And so, me, when anything gets popular enough, I really can't stand it anymore. So now I feel like I got to pick a different monster because everybody's, Mind Flayer, Stranger Things. Like, I was Mind Flayering before like that was ever even thought of in ubiquity. But anyway, it was sliced cantaloupe in a package. It was like in a styrofoam tray, it looked like, and they'd put cellophane around it, and it was a half melon that had been sliced, half a cantaloupe that had been sliced into, half moon shapes, I guess you could say, or C shapes. I'm not so sure about that because I don't remember any pre-packaging of fruit.
That was pre-sliced. No.
Fruit was fruit. You bought fruit. You sliced it up. You diced it. You were your own fruit ninja. They did not have this stuff that was marked up 3 or 4 times for your convenience that they'd already sliced up. I don't remember that. But anyway, maybe I'm wrong.
No, there was no slicing. There was no slicing in produce then, and I will attest to that. And the other thing that I thought was really cool about that show was the 80s references and the mall. And I realize now when I see a mall how really cool that is, because we just don't have that anymore.
Talking about the mall, I had 4 jobs in the mall at the same time, I might add, in the early 90s. So just coming out of high school in the early 90s, I actually worked in the mall. And of course, the mall was I would describe it as the church of capitalism within the community.
Definitely.
Because, and of course, it's a place where commerce is conducted wall to wall, whether it's ice cream or Orange Julius or tapes and records or clothing, whatever it was, you're buying stuff.
But there's a status element. There's a very big status element involved in walking through a mall.
But the churchy element to it, if I may, was the community that occurred at the mall. This was where everyone, no matter what clique they were in high school, no matter what clique they were in society as adults, whether they lived in the affluent section of town or the poor section of town, or, pick your niche as far as plight is concerned, one way or the other, you went to the mall. And the mall was where everybody was in the 1980s. And so I think that's the interesting thing to note about the mall, whether it be a big double-decker shopping mall like the one they have there, or we had 2 malls actually here where I'm from, and we only have 1 now. So there was an East Side Mall, and then there was a West Side Mall that was probably half, if not even smaller than that, maybe half the size of the other mall. But they were both just tunnels. Yeah. I mean, they were literally both just galley style kitchens where it's one counter on one side and one counter on the other side. That's where the stores were. They just lined them up, and you walked through it. And then the one had like a skylight, but there was nothing to the tune of the Stranger Things. And it's interesting because even my girlfriend, who's Gen Z, not born till like 1999, turns to me and says, "That's a pretty fancy mall for Hawkins, Indiana. I thought this was supposed to be a small town." I said, "Yeah, I think they're alluding to a suburb that maybe is some distance away or some other community that has this mall."
Like Mall of America or something.
I've been to the Mall of America, and that was at least the largest mall in the United States at the time, but the largest mall in the world at the time was the Edmonton Mall. And I went to the mall in Edmonton in 1999, and then went to the Mall of America in Minneapolis in 2009. So they were separated by 10 years, but I have visited both, and I don't know what the biggest mall in the world is now. Do I care? Even at the time I was like, great, a mall. But they had like dolphins in the mall in Edmonton. I remember taking my ex-wife there when we were still just living together in Sin. Interesting that I should bring up Sin because I kind of want to talk to you about that today a little bit. But staying on malls for the moment, she wanted to go to this themed hotel with like this Roman columns and this Roman bath and these things. So we stayed in this hotel that was attached to the Edmonton Mall, and they had dolphin shows in the mall. And of course they had a Ferris wheel in the mall and a roller coaster in the mall. And it was those times where it was just like, oh, wouldn't it be cool to take all of these giant things and stuff them into a mall and blend it in with this commerce? So it didn't do a lot for me then. It certainly doesn't do a lot for me now. It's a lot of walking to buy a lot of things or look at a lot of things that I don't want, need, or know why they even exist. But it's the way we live in Occidental society, So,
well, Jack Hansen, if this podcast reaches 1 million subscribers, I think you and I need to open a record store inside the mall.
Ooh, okay, a record store, huh?
Yeah, that'd be fun.
You're now. Michael is very into vinyl. We're both into vinyl, but Michael's musical tastes run a gamut like no other. You, I know, have been really steeped in classical music of late. Obviously, you're a fan of classic rock. I think the only thing that you don't really get into, do you like country music?
No.
Okay, I didn't think so. So, no country, which, again, we agree on. Sorry, Branson, Missouri, but it's just not our thing. You can, continue to fiddle your hearts out. That's fine.
But I would really like to start a record store because I really think that America and just the world and society in general needs businesses that create community. Just like you were talking about with the mall. There needs to be this element in our society where we can go to a place, whether it's a bookstore or whether it's a memorabilia store or whatever it might be, a record store, and just share ideas, meet people who maybe don't listen to the same type of music that you do, and just hang out. Because that is definitely one thing that I miss about today's commerce is just, I miss the days of going somewhere and not even having to buy something. Just walking in, looking, and just looking. Just paging, tabbing through the books or the record albums and just seeing. And I was walking through the store or the mall yesterday with my daughter, and we were picking up something for my wife for Mother's Day. And I told my wife my daughter there was a vacant stall in the mall, and I said, wouldn't that be an awesome wall to put a bunch of albums up on? And just have them all showcased, and you could showcase, the latest Taylor Swift album, or you could showcase the latest Eminem album, or the latest Adele album, or the Boston albums, or the Beatles. And you could have just a totally cool collage of album art right there in that big window. And I was also, then of course, the business brain kicks in, and I say, I wonder how many records I'd have to sell a month in order to afford a place at the mall. Because I'm sure even in our town, the mall is not a cheap place to lease space from.
No, certainly downtown where we live is not a cheap place for space rent, that's for sure. It's interesting this should come up, because I was just hearing, I believe it was earlier today or late last week on the national news that plays as a part of where I work at the radio station. Because, again, I don't follow you follow the national news and kind of let me know what's going on. The only reason I know what's going on is because I hear it in the background at work. Otherwise, I'd be in the dark about things that happen. It's like, oh, really? We're invading what country? Oh, I didn't know that. It's like, Jack, that happened 6 months ago. Like, it's lost on me. I'm letting Jack doing Jack's things, So
don't tell me I don't do Jack around here.
That's right. All news and no play makes Jack an angry boy. Also depresses him too much, so that's probably why he stays away from it. But there was something on there about Starbucks really taking a hit in the last quarter, apparently. And, no surprise to me because, again, the progenitors of Starbucks, now the original guys, I can remember going to the Kingdome in Seattle, Washington, when there was a Starbucks a few blocks away. And my brother used to get like a couple shots of espresso before it ever caught on. This was like 80s, going to baseball games, Mariners games and stuff. And boy, you needed a lot of espresso to endure with those teams back then. That's for sure, because they were so mad. Hello to Billy Swift, wherever he is today, too. And Lenny Sakata. Billy Swift and Lenny Sakata, a big hello.
I thought you were going to say Lenny Wilkins.
Yeah, Lenny Wilkins. I think my mother met him, actually, over at a Sonics game in the late 70s. I know she met Slick Watts. Anyway, without going down former sports rabbit holes, Starbucks, I think it may have been Howard Schultz, or it was one of the early guys when they started taking off. Everybody said nobody's going to pay $3 for a cup of coffee back when it was $3, and now it's like $9. But everybody said this is going to fail because coffee is 50 cents at Denny's still, or it's 75 cents at the 7-Eleven. You can get refills all day for free. Nobody's going to go for this. And, of course, everybody went for it. The next thing you know, there were more Starbucks than there were, like places to worship and whatever, pick your religion, I mean, it's just, and the secret to that success, I remember, I think, again, it was Howard Schultz or one of the early purveyors of this in the company said, it's not the coffee. You guys don't get it. We're not selling the coffee. We're selling the community. We're selling the experience, like you're saying. We're selling the experience of coming in and sitting down with your beverage and being able to commune with people, and even silently. You don't have to get up and ask somebody what they're reading. If you do, you do, and the conversation is struck up. But that was the nucleus of what they were doing. And so it's not surprising this many years later, with the world being what it's become, and with every Starbucks just about now equipped with a drive-through window, and with Frappuccinos coming in the most egregious of flavors under the rainbow, and they're $14 a piece. It's no wonder. I mean, the only people going there are kids or people that have been addicts for a long time. A lot of people are dropping Starbucks. I did several years ago. And like I think I've referenced on a previous podcast, I even have written proof that at one time it was my only corporate vice, because that was the title of that work. It was about my addiction to Starbucks coffee and going there for those very reasons. I liked to sit with my laptop open and sip my overly sugared quadruple. Yeah,
that was a dark time for Jack. And very dark time.
But Jack grew up and he shook the corporate vice. But at one time it was a big deal to me. So yeah, you're right. We are sort of losing that. And I think it brings up an even deeper subject that we could peruse as well, which is how attached are we to corporeal reality? How attached are we to the tangibilities of three-dimensional experience? Because now, everything you were talking about music, well, music stores are hard, or they were at least for a while, because music doesn't get released anymore in a format that is tangible. It gets dropped. I love that. It drops on April 16th.
Yeah, it gets uploaded.
The new Bucky Aldrich coming out soon. His eponymous debut will drop on May 11th. It's like, what the hell are you dropping? If I drop my tape enough times on my 8-track, I break the damn thing. You don't drop your music. You know what I mean? You buy it at the store after it's released on release day, which was always Tuesday, by the way, in the past. Now they've moved it. I think it's Friday. But in any event, now it's funny how even the younger generation is circling back and saying, well, I still stream music, obviously, but I love vinyl is huge now. People want that piece of tangible, they want that piece of tangibility. They want that object de art.
Let's just say it. They want community. And if you're a fan of any sports team, if you're a fan of any band, it's not the band. It's the community.
Yeah, it's going to the concert and being with everybody who also loves the band.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's
It's
something
interesting. There. Yeah, I think there is too. I mean, it's an interesting phenomenon because brick and mortar, when the .com era began, was essentially dead. Everyone said these malls we're talking about today are going to be closed. They're done.
Yeah.
All of them.
I mean,
the whole world was going to change, and we were going to move to a society that was completely about shipping logistics and manufacturing and direct-to-door services and direct-to-door products. And Amazon, of course, still makes its billions and billions every year. Or whatever it is.
Brick and mortar is going to look differently in the future, and I think it's got to adapt, obviously, as anything does. But yeah, I really do think that there's still a place for brick and mortar, and you just have to do it differently, you know. And that was one of the conversations that then my daughter and I got into on our way back home. Was we were saying that, you know, you can't just have the same albums that Target has. You can't just have the same albums that Walmart has.
You have to have a used section. I mean,
totally. That's part of it.
It's mandatory in this day and age because the day and age where you just walk in and it's all new releases, I don't think that would fly. No. I think you carry some new releases, obviously, and I think you carry a good smattering, if not more, of indie bands as well. You know, some really unusual stuff that people will discover.
80% of the inventory needs to be used, and I think that you do two things by doing that. One, there's always going to be new inventory because people are going to be, you know, trying to sell you albums. They're going to be trying to, you know, whatever it might be. And then, funny enough, there's actually wholesalers that actually specialize in used albums now, too. So record stores can actually become kind of part of a network of other record stores. And I think you also then, not only are you getting new inventory constantly, but you also develop a very unique brand because your community is very unique. So the people who live in your community will have different tastes. And there is a ton of very bad vinyl in our community. I've seen it firsthand at the secondhand stores. But then there's also really good ones. And you and I have been to a few different record expos in the region, and there's a lot of old classic rock guys. And I'm telling you, when those guys are going to be starting to turn in their vinyl and maybe go into the old folks' home or whatever it might be, that's going to be when you and I are going to just thrive because we love that music.
Yeah, I'd like to see it expand beyond, you know, me, the anti-capitalist in the room, of course. I mean, you can spit on me as much as you want, and I'm as much a slave to it as anybody because I was I'm born in Western society and, you know, certainly buy my share of things that I enjoy. But at the same time, I also say, what the hell am I doing? Just piling up all these things. At the same time, though, there's always going to be a need for things because, again, we're in corporeal form. We're human beings. We're in a tangible existence. We've got to have stuff in order to survive. And we also have to have some things to keep us busy. And music is just one of them. But I'd love to see the idea that surrounds pretty much all commerce, you know, all shopping, at least all this brick and mortar experiential stuff that we're talking about here. I'd like to see it expand some way, somehow, so that it's not so much about buying something, so that it really can become more than that. And I know that's difficult to do because in order to stay in business and pay the rent, you've got to sell something. So it can't become a philanthropic enterprise overnight because it's not viable. But I don't know. I would love to see maybe instead of maybe it's by donation almost, or maybe you invite the local bands in, or you say, hey, if you purchase some of our, you know, whatever it is, coffee, or I don't know, you know, these, what do they call, what's the big thing with
free trade?
Free trade, yeah. But you've purchased some of our free trade coffee that's direct from small farms in Belize that are connected with our operation, then you can watch the show at no charge and bring in local musicians. Or I
think that's why merch has become such a big deal. I mean, how many restaurants do you go to nowadays where they sell merch for their with their logo on it, or they sell the batter for their beer bread or whatever it might be? You know, I think that's another thing. You're striking on something too, that it's like, okay, it's very unique to that restaurant. And how many people buy the shirt just because they want a weird shirt that has a dead pig on the front of it and looks kind of whatever, you know what I mean?
It's nothing like wearing something with a picture of Scrapple all over it.
Yeah.
That's a very popular item too in certain parts of Chicago, because Carl Sandburg called Chicago the hog butcher of America for a reason. So they love Scrapple in Chicago and some places down south. By the way, in case you don't know, Scrapple is all the parts of the pig that you do not want to eat, but some people enjoy it. So nothing like a T-shirt with Scrapple all over it.
Is it fried?
It probably is at some state fair. I mean, where they basically, like, if there are state fair police organizations, there's like a state fair Gestapo that goes around.
We don't serve vegetables in these parts.
I mean, Michael, fried butter. I think we hit cholesterol's nadir with fried butter. I mean, it's bad enough picking up a stick of butter and eating it to begin with, but frying it on top of it, that
takes some skill.
I wanted to be enraged, but I could only laugh.
So what are you drinking today in your bedazzled Stanley?
Well, nothing on the order. It reminds me of an old Simpsons line when Homer's actually complaining, I think, about putting on weight.
Smithers.
And Marge says, I'm not the one who puts butter in your coffee. I just think to myself, ooh, butter in my coffee. That's actually pretty good. So, well, what's swirling around in my cup is a little different than what's swirling around in my head today, because we talk about fried butter, and that is a sin, to be sure. It's a sinful food.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been thinking a lot about grinding my gears on the subject of sin for some reason. And I think it came up because I was thinking about something that I took pride in. I was thinking about, I don't recall what it was now off the top of my head, but I was taking my walk. I take 2 walks a day, by the way. I walk 2 miles a day.
Good for you.
And it's a half a mile of city streets in the morning hour, and half a mile back. It adds up to a mile. And then during my lunch hour, I do the same thing. And it's because I can't stand exercising in gyms. The other stuff is just boring to me. So I usually just walk to stay in shape. But on my walk, I was thinking about something, and to myself as I was walking, or perhaps even in some soliloquial fashion, because I have been known to do that in front of others without giving it a second thought, just blah, blah, blah. I said, well, I'm actually very proud of myself. You should be proud of yourself, Jack, for that. And it stopped me on a dime, and I thought, wait a minute. Maybe I was thinking then of The Stand, because I thought of old Mother Hubbard, what's her name, out there in the cornfield, that said, I have sinned in pride. You're not supposed to be prideful. So it got me to thinking about pride, and then that got me to thinking about sin, and I kind of wanted to go over some thoughts about that, because I think sin, quite honestly, is really underrated in some ways. And the first way that I think it's underrated is we have a tendency to really waste on those who came before us. I mean, even people that were born just 10, 20 years ago, we're talking about things now like the 80s and stuff that happened 30, 40 years ago. You will basically relegate someone, kids will say, I know what the hell you're talking about, because you didn't have technology. Technology hadn't advanced to make you this supercomputer wannabe who's plugged in to can do all the equations for you. And I hate that, because I want to stretch it way back, because we really don't pay the proper homage to people who lived hundreds, nay, thousands of years ago and didn't possess these technologies. These people went through large measures of shit, to put it in a blunt fashion. Same things we go through today. Earthquakes, floods, volcanoes, tornadoes, you name it, they went through it. But they went through it with a lot of straw huts and nothing that was built to withstand the 8.5 magnitude quake. There was no World Health Organization to rush in and help with disease control. There was no Peace Corps. Go on and on and on about modern infrastructure. There were none of these things to safeguard and shield people. These were distant future advents. So these people went through and experienced a lot. And the thing is, Michael, is I believe that regardless of technology's influence on today's world and the people who live in it, in Western societies anyway, our experiences in general are very typical of those that people who lived hundreds or thousands of years ago went through. We all fall in love a few times, perhaps. We all get our heart broken a few times, perhaps. We all lose somebody along the way, be it a child or a grandpa or a parent or
a job.
Or a job, exactly. we might lose a body part. I mean, they lost a lot more of them back in those days, I think, than they do now, because if the, tiger or lion's roaring towards a village, somebody's got to step in and try to stop the thing, right? So it seems like we don't give our ancestors much credit. In fact, if anything, we bash the hell out of them for being of the conquering mindset, or collectively doing something under a regime that is known for something nefarious that really wasn't probably their fault. They were just trying not to get in trouble with the king, right? I mean, so...
Yeah, I think you and I were talking about that not too long ago. For whatever reason, I had this kind of like weird deja vu experience where I was like, if I was living in this area during, let's say, the Middle Ages, and I would probably, I'd need a house. So the house that I lived in was probably deeded to me by my parents when they died. And the Duke of the land in this region would have probably, given one of my ancestors the deed because he fought in some battle. And then it made me think too that whoever was the king or whoever was the ruler of your region could really mess with your life if they wanted to. I mean, they would dictate everything from, when you got up in the morning to when you retired, or whatever it might be. And I don't think there was retirement back then. In fact, I just saw an article that said the ancient Romans actually worked less than we do today.
Yeah, they had retirement back then. It was called when they stoned you to death at the center circle of town, in the town square, when you were no longer of any use to them, or when you stole something from the merchants. But
we definitely, I think in this day and age, we definitely work more than our ancestors did. We maybe don't work as hard as they had to because of all the technological advancements. I know that my relatives for sure worked much more laborious farming and just very hard jobs than what I have to do right now. But
yeah, well, there's no question, that all that's true. And on a cultural level, on a societal level, I suppose, collectively, sure. All those things could be said. But, I'm sort of boiling this down to, when it comes to sin, it's like the individual level. And the 7 deadly or 7 cardinal sins emerged out of, I think, a lot of group discussions. I love the way that the Bible actually was originated. The genesis of the Bible was, of course, dates back to the Hebrew people, when the Hebrews were sort of walking around originally talking to themselves, going, this voice is talking to me. There's this voice from somewhere else that's kind of giving me thoughts and ideas, and I'm starting to question things about why I'm here. And then this was muffled about, and finally one day, speaking of community, 2 guys got together and said, hey, I just heard you talking about this God person. He's been talking to me too. You want to get together and talk about it? And they did. And the next thing you know, there was a 3rd, and then a 4th, and then a dozen, and then there you go. Suddenly, there's theology. It's born, and it's born out of, and there were, of course, theologies prior to that, and they were all born in similar fashions. People began to commune about, hey, why the fuck are we here? What is this? Who put us here? Do we have a raison d'etre, a reason to be? What's going on? And to me, that's still something that we should be doing. And so out of that, when they walk through their daily experiences, then all of a sudden, they begin to recognize the pitfalls of living as a human with other humans. And finally, they put together a nice little list, 7 items. I don't think it's too big. I don't think it's too small. It's enough to remember if you go to the grocery store without your damn phone on you. It should be anyway. If not, check yourself and start doing some Mad Libs or something so you can up your memory. But there are 7 deadly sins, and I want to go through them one by one because I want to apply them, I think, to today's world, because I got to thinking about them. Because what are these sins? Everybody wants to make, sort of this big, they want to make it this big deal. They want to put you in front of the preacher or the reverend, and he's reading you the riot act, and you're going to go to hell and all these kinds of things. I want to take it off of that platform because I think these sins were identified as only being things that will make your life and the life of others in your community more difficult if you perpetrate them. And so I went through the sins and looked at them, the 7 deadly sins as they call them, and ordered them from 1 to 7 with the first ones being having the most obvious and immediate impact on you and the world around you if they're committed, to those which are a little bit more questionable, I suppose. And so I want to run down these if you're ready.
Now, let's just back up a little bit.
Okay.
Neither Jack Hansen or I are claiming to be prophets, one, or two, members of the clergy and pastors in any way, shape, or form. In fact, the Bible doesn't even refer to 7 deadly sins. So what Jack is saying that, you know, there are these things collectively that are known throughout history as the 7 deadly sins. We are not saying that the Bible says this. I just want to put that very clearly out there, because nowhere in the Bible does it say that there are 7 deadly sins, because I can already hear the hate mail coming our way. So we're not doing that at all.
Again, people might want to stuff into one category or another where it doesn't necessarily belong. It just needs to be looked at as something that you shan't do because your day is going to be more difficult, or your life in general will be. And the first one is wrath. So that was what I started with. And wrath is when you're just pissed off, when you take your wrath out on somebody else, especially in a violent way. Well, that immediately has an impact on the world, does it not? Because you've just potentially taken a human life. If we're taking it to the extreme of homicide, then wrath has just cost your neighbor his life because you got pissed at him because he didn't return your wrench or whatever. So you beat him with it, or, you know, whatever the Midwestern headline is. Wrath has an immediate impact potentially on you and the world. So I think it's at the top of the list for sins. Lust is the second one, because, again, if you sleep with your neighbor's wife and he finds out, then wrath could also ensue. So they're almost tied together. But lust can get us into a lot of trouble. And we can lust for, immediately sex comes to mind, but obviously we can lust for a lot of things. And lust is this uncontrollable desire, seemingly, to do something that, in my mind, isn't bad or wrong, because, as we know, there's nothing wrong with sex. There's nothing wrong with food, and that's kind of a different one, which is gluttony, which is overindulgence. But what lust is referring to, in my mind, is it's an overindulgence in something that's repetitive. It's an overindulgence in something that has the same outcome over and over and over again. And so, therefore, there's no progress being made. You're just spinning your wheels. If you are a lustful person, and you are sexually lustful and you can't get enough and you just are lusting all the time, you're spinning your wheels, because you can have 1,000,000 orgasms, and I guarantee you, no matter how intense the next one may be, it's the same freaking orgasm that you just had, packaged up slightly different, if at all. So to me, that's what the pitfall of lust is all about. Gluttony is sort of the same thing. It has to do with food. We think about an overindulgence in general. If you're gluttonous, then you're overindulging in something that can add weight to your body, that can make your body unhealthy. Again, there's an impact, but it might take a little longer than wrath or lust, which could have immediate impacts or more immediate impacts. Greed, it would be next. We know being greedy can cost us dearly. So that's one that obviously makes, kind of midway through the list, because if you're greedy for very long, you can have a lot of troubles in different ways in your life, because, again, you can't get enough. And when you can't get enough, what eventually winds up happening? You put people second. You might steal from them. You might not share with them. And therefore, you're becoming autocratic. You're giving yourself more weight than another person. You're losing, I think, one of the ideas for you to be here to share this experience, which should be as egalitarian as possible. My neighbor Charlie is just as important as me. He shouldn't really have any less than me, especially when times are tough and the hurricane has blown through town. But if you're greedy, then suddenly, well, I'm immune to all those effects. I should have more than him because I just need it more. I deserve it more. We can assign whatever reason we want to it, whatever type of excuse we want to it. Doesn't make sense. Greed is bad. Sloth, I think that's a pretty easy one to sort out. Yes, obviously, if sloth refers to laziness, it refers to apathy. And if you get apathetic, then things around you fall into a state of disrepair, and fecal matter may pile up in corners and draw flies and disease. And obviously, it's going to affect your body potentially. So we can see, again, the impacts of what just laying around and doing nothing all day might be. And it might be a little longer for sloth to really make an impact on your life than wrath would. And that's, again, kind of how I'm stretching these out. And then we end the list with envy and pride. And those are interesting because, again, pride is what got me to thinking about all this in the first place. And I'm on the fence with pride because I can see where if you are overly prideful, this could be an issue. But I don't think there's anything wrong personally with being proud, especially in today's day and age, being proud of something that really is of, for lack of a more wholesome term, maybe wholesome is a good term, wholesome constitution. It is good for you. It is good for the world. I quit smoking. I quit vaping. I'm proud of myself for doing that. It was hard. I don't have a problem with that. So I think pride deserves an asterisk because I think if we're overly prideful about things that don't really matter or really maybe are already harmful for us, like if we take too much pride in having more cars than the neighbor does or newer cars or a bigger house or, that game, then I can see where pride is a problem. But being proud in general of things, I think that's great. I think that propagates a sense of goodwill towards yourself and others. Neighbors that show off all these things and have all this pride and this stuff and play that jonesing game, we have envy. And because obviously that can create envy in others. And also, if you envy the fact that your neighbor has flashier cars or a bigger house or a swimming pool or whatever the case may be, then you're in a position to say, what I've been given isn't good enough. And so when you say that, you've put yourself in a place to say that this miracle of existence, this miracle of this body and all these possibilities that go with it, you don't care about it because
Right.
I don't have this, I don't have that. And hence we come to why I have an issue with Western society in general, with capitalist mentality, because that's kind of a little bit, if not altogether, what spirals off of it is this, hey, if I don't have this, I'm not a complete person. I won't be happy. There's nothing for me to be joyous about because I don't have all these things my neighbors do. And that's bullshit. That's not right in the least possible way. So there it is, Michael, my list of 7 sins. And again, why I feel like, the word sin is overblown because they're just pitfalls. They're things that people thousands of years ago recognized in themselves and others, and they had trouble when they would perpetrate these ills on themselves and others. And so they tried to pass them along. What do we do with them today? It's a world filled with sin. Hell, we have a whole city that's called Sin City, and everybody loves to visit it and throw lots of money at it and have plenty of fun. So, I don't know, interesting. What do you think?
Okay, I think what we're also really talking about is when we say that somebody lost their way and that they've turned their back on God. I mean, that's what I mean, and I will just say that when it comes to my beliefs, I have a certain set of beliefs, and I also welcome other people's beliefs that maybe don't believe in the same thing. But I also just think that, like, when we say that we're committing a sin, it's that we're committing a sin against God, and we're forgetting about our relationship with God. And the reason I believe that is because I think there are decisions that I've made in my life through my faith and with my faith that have led me to the point that I am at now. Whether it be the relationship that I have with other people, whether it be the relationship that I have with my wife, maybe it's that my children, the way I'm trying to raise them in the world. And I think that for me, it kind of goes back to, you're talking about 7 kind of waypoints and areas where I say, am I being too greedy in this situation? Am I losing sight of what really is important to me in my life? And it's not that I am going to say that, that person is going to go to hell because they decided to buy a Ferrari with their money, and I don't feel like they're, really having God's best intentions by buying that Ferrari. I mean, who am I to say that, right? I'm not a prophet. I'm not somebody who can cast the first stone. But I think that for me, that's what that list is it is kind of that turning your back on your Creator and forgetting that, I really do believe you can be prideful in what you have in life. And that's not a sin. I don't feel like it is. I don't feel like Jesus ever said, nope, don't ever be prideful for what you have. I think what really the teachings of Jesus was that he was trying to create a better world with people who were able to say what I just said without fear of persecution, which is that, I believe that those are the things that we can do in our lives to better position ourselves with God's intention. So there you go. That's what I think.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And the word, unfortunately, the word God is, just always kind of creates a divide without meaning to, because, for
Absolutely.
people that don't have a theology or a God that they subscribe to, but they are spiritual, and there's plenty of those out there, because it just means that, they want to, they're wanting to be connected without necessarily the packaging of a religion. And I think, that's fine. So, I think these things you're talking about, you're turning your back on, or you're really not remembering where you come from. You're really not remembering that glue, the magic, and God is just one word or expression we use for that. A lot of people use universe or source. It doesn't matter what you call it, but you're forgetting about the constitution of everything. You're forgetting about existence, basically. You're forgetting about where you come from and what really matters, because this experience is ephemeral. We touch on that all the time. Because we've been given the gift of being sentient, we know that this ride will end. We don't want to accept it.
Right.
I mean, boy, do we not want to accept it. There are plenty of people that, Botox was invented for people that don't want to accept that this ride is going to end, and gravity is a thing. Hey, this ride is going to end.
Our existence as we know it will end eventually.
Our corporeal reality individually, as this person, as this Jack Hansen person or this Michael Elliott person, is designed to be ephemeral. Thank God, thank whatever you believe in for that, because then it means, in my mind, you get to move on and do something else with whatever this energy is. And again, we've talked about energy, and my belief is that spiritual energy follows the same law of physics that physical energy does, which is it can't be created or destroyed, so therefore it's infinite. It's always been and it always will be, and it can take on whatever form it wants to. How that happens, Jesus, I don't. But I think it's not my job to know at this point. My job is to be in human form at this point and to start recognizing what's going on in this experience and to try to help myself and the people around me in this experience. And so this was just one way that I thought to do it, because I just feel like we're hard on our ancestors. We look at people who lived in ancient Mesopotamia or ancient Egypt or, one of the Aztec Empire, or then, fast forward it through the next century or fast forward it through the next 1,000 years. We beat on those people and we just treat them like they don't know anything. And they were just completely, those old timers, because they didn't have a smartphone, because they didn't have Netflix, because they didn't have, heated leather seats. These creature comforts are nice for us, but they provide an enormous distraction that we've got to figure out how to properly separate, because they warned us about these things, because they weren't stupid.
There's wisdom.
Went through all the same things.
Right. There's wisdom in those things. Whether you believe in Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, whether you believe in Allah, whether you believe in whatever, or maybe you're an atheist and you don't believe in a packaged religion because that's just not your flavor, right? Okay, whatever it might be, I think what you're also touching on is that first thing that you had mentioned before you listed the 7 deadly sins, which is they're questioning existence. Well, and I think that was the question that I wanted to bring up too, is, Jack, do we even know what existence is?
Well, I think we could agree on existence is anything that we can sense or even comprehend as potentially being some kind of real. It doesn't have to be 3-dimensionally real, but it can be a feeling. It can be a whisper on the breeze. It's anything. It can be this laptop computer that I'm in front of. It can be the coffee in my cup. It could be any of the atomic particles that put those things together. It could be just the thought of those things in a being's mind where this world doesn't even exist yet. It's only the flickering in an imagination. That's existence. So existence to me is transcendent of all forms, regardless of what they may be. And just circling back real quickly to the sin thing and, these 7 identifiable pitfalls, if you will, that men or people can create and create trouble for themselves. It seems to be more applicable to people that have a theological compunction. It comes to mind that obviously these sins are going to be of a greater importance to anybody that feels like there may be more at stake than just, hey,
Bingo.
if I do this to my neighbor, I do this to myself.
You just nailed it.
Then I could be in trouble with the big guy or something else. And to me, that also funnels into karma. But let's not forget our friends, the nihilists either, whom I completely don't identify with. Nihilistic people think that this whole thing is chaos and there's no reason for existence or for us to be here whatsoever. And yet, nonetheless, it's inarguable that these sins, these pitfalls, if committed by said nihilists, will trip them up in their day-to-day lives. So, see,
But does the nihilist believe that?
Well, the nihilist, my point is, Michael, is we can't change the nihilist mind, and we don't want to. That's their belief. If they want to believe that there's no reason for any of this and that it's all just bullshit or whatever, that's fine. They're allowed to believe that because they've been given the gift of choice. And it's their choice to believe that this is all just an accident and it's,
okay, so
chaos.
there's the other key word, belief. It comes down to faith. It comes down to what you just said, which is these are things that I want to stay away from because they're going to trip me up. And now if you don't believe that, then that's your choice. You've chosen not to believe that if you do XYZ, it's not going to trip you up. And I think that that's really where I was getting at was it goes from first that level of existence. Do we know what existence is? We start to question it. We start to think of ways that, well, how do we exist? And then it goes quickly to faith, which is, how do I believe I need to live my life? And do I believe that there's going to be something that strikes me dead someday because of all these bad things that I've done? Or do I believe that life is going to be everlasting? It's going to be eternal? What do I believe? I mean, because we don't have evidence that we can show each other. Look, no, here it is. And if I did, would you believe it? That's another question. But I think it really, it's the two things. It's existence and it's faith.
This also gets into where do things like empathy and conscience, having a conscience come from? Yeah. Where do those things stem from? And I'll give you a perfect example. I think it's a good example, if not perfect. It's of a guy who just died, who I think suffered immensely, even though he wasn't punished for his crimes, his sins, and that's Orenthal James Simpson. I think you take a look at OJ, and in the court of the public, I think you look at, if we can all agree that the evidence is pretty well stacked against him, it's overwhelming that he committed these murders. Well, he was acquitted in court, and so therefore he didn't receive any punishment by our set of laws.
Right.
And yet, he appeared to me, and again, didn't know the man, so obviously this is all conjecture, speculation, but it appeared to me, especially coming out with the whole "what if I did it" iteration in his timeline.
Yeah.
This is a man who suffered immensely. This was a man who had, in some way, a conscience that got buried because he had to remain free. And I'm not trying to get into dissecting the crime of OJ and whether he. What I'm talking about is there are more ways to be punished by virtue of these things than just going to prison for something.
Yes.
And that's where we really start to get somewhere. That's where we really start to say, okay, if I commit these things in my daily life, if these are trespasses that I choose to commit willfully, then even if I get away with them by human standards and I don't go to jail or I don't get fined, what happens to me? Well, you wait and see what happens to you.
Right. And, okay, so what was worse for OJ? Was it worse for OJ that he didn't go to prison? Was it worse for OJ that he went from here all the way down to here?
He was a household name. He was a celebrity, football player, movie actor. I mean, he had it all. Anything anybody would want in this society, he had everything. And suddenly he was revered by some nutcases, but he was also one of the most vilified, infamous people in history because of the crime that again, it's kind of undeniable looking at the evidence. I mean, is there a parallel universe where OJ didn't do it and all the same evidence is stacked against him? I guess. I mean,
well, and I still say
if it fits, you must acquit universe, but
right. And I still say that the biggest crime of it all is that two people lost their life and there was never enough evidence to prove that anyone did it.
Well, and that
I feel is the biggest crime.
And this is where, Michael, though, where things like the belief in a deity that does pass some form of judgment, or karma, which is kind of my bag. I'm big into karma. The reactions of a universe that is able to in some way gauge, maybe even on a spiritually, it's, antithetical to think of, but spiritually scientific way, or in some framework. We want to build this network where the injustices are purified, where we want to say that this is made right because we can realize that it's wrong, because we know that it's wrong, because we know two people died in a bloody heap. And it is, to say it's unfortunate, try to be their parents or their loved ones. Yeah. This is a horrible way. I had an uncle who was murdered, and I was close to him, and I was a child when this happened. And it's a horrible way to lose somebody. My Uncle John, who was the funniest guy ever, by the way, too. I'll take cards and letters all day. He was absolutely the sharpest, the funniest person I've ever known in my life. And he died when I was 9 years old. And Johnny wasn't a transient, but he kind of lived like one. He was kind of like a Kramer sort of person. Mm-hmm. Nobody really knew what he did, but he always had plenty of money. And he drove this big, long boat car, this Ford LTD or some, comparable vehicle from the 70s. And Johnny just did Johnny things. And he was great. He was a wonderful person. He was the kindest man. He was a big, tall man. But two teenagers befriended him, or purported to befriend him. And apparently, as the story goes, they drove him up someplace, and they were all drinking Jack Daniels around a fire somewhere, living like hobos or doing whatever they're doing. And they wanted to rob my uncle, and they decided that in order to rob him, they had to smash his head in with a rock. And they did. And I believe Johnny only had, at that time, like $18 on him. And, this is 1982. So even then, that's not a lot of money. So, again, my uncle was killed for $18. These kids were just that. They were juveniles. I believe they were 16 and 17 or 15 and 16, something like that. So they served very little time in a very low security facility, and then they were not tried as adults, and then they were released, and they've been out living, walking around, doing whatever they've been doing now for years. Maybe they're dead. I don't know. But then me, as Jack Hansen, having lost my uncle, John, who bears my namesake, I'm named after him. So what do I do with that? As someone who's been, again, the victim, I guess, of this, and I'm not big on victim mode. To me, I'm big on empowering, even through the really, really hard stuff, like the tornado that wipes out the schoolhouse or the church on Sunday morning. I'm not big on victim stuff. I'm big on, why did this happen? Let's find a reason inside so we can strengthen ourselves to rebuild this thing and keep going, because what else are we going to do? And I know it gets hard, but I think the me that's like so many other people that would be in the aftermath of that would walk through that, would say, I just want to design some kind of matrix, be it driven by a God, be it driven by a universe that's all wise, or being driven by some kind of mechanism, again, that is able to sort that out and say, okay, these two will pay, for their crimes. But really, the greatest thing I've ever seen in the courtrooms, and we love to watch the ones where the father of the daughter who's raped and murdered is on, sitting there in the courtroom while the person who's being tried for it is sitting there with a smirk on his face, and the guy goes ballistic and attacks him, and it's all over the news. We love to watch that wrath. Again, we'll go back to the top of our list. We watch that wrath begatting that wrath in the courtroom, this violent crime that only perpetuates more violence. So I have always really admired, envied, been prideful even on behalf of people who can sit there in that same circumstance and say, I forgive this person. I love this person. Again, love is the perpetual energy. No matter what happens on the backside of it or the front end of it, it's the only thing that can really get us through this experience. And what is it? It's this undefinable, ineffable feeling. It's this thing that comes over us and allows us to do something miraculous, which is look the killer of our daughter or son or mother or daughter or whoever it is in the face in the courtroom with the smirk on their face and say, I love you and I forgive you. Yeah, that's more powerful than any any power that's able to take a human life. There's no question about that.
Well, because we've all been granted forgiveness at some point.
Oh, yeah.
And the only thing that you can ever really fully hope is that the actions of somebody else, whether it be drunk driving or whether it be whatever, the 2 kids that smashed your uncle's head in. The only thing you can ever really hope for is that they find it in their soul to ask for forgiveness, to ask for mercy.
And you can't tend to another person's soul. It's their soul. It's their responsibility.
No.
So even if they don't get there, you have to be okay with yours. And this is where a belief, as you said, in something, anything, sorry, nihilist, but this is to me where, in my personal opinion, you're falling short. This is where George Carlin fell short, because he got very nihilistic, especially down the home stretch of his life. And he had a tough upbringing. He's one of my idols. We talked about him just on our last podcast. An incredible guy, made me laugh and made me think as much or more than anybody ever did, especially for a celebrity, because I'm not into celebrity people that much. They don't impress with them because they don't really do anything. But it's that belief that there is something more going on, no matter how you dress it up. It doesn't matter whether it's a God. It doesn't matter whether it's a universe. It doesn't matter whether it's karma. It doesn't matter whether it's reincarnation. It doesn't matter what it is, but there's just a belief that there is something more that you will eventually be doing. Will you go to heaven? Will you go to another life? Will karma play out and you'll get to be inside of a beetle's body the next time around, or get reincarnated as yourself again to do this same exact experience in duplicate, only you want to do a few things different? I don't know. Pick your poison. But that, to me, is what carries a person over the finish line, because it gets you out of this reality. It gets you out from being stuck in this particular little tiny pocket of corporealism. You're not necessarily going to be here forever. There's going to be more. So you need to figure out a way to move on from this, because there not only is more for you, there will be more for you. I mean, that more is already unfolding. It's already happening. So you have to be able to move on. And I know it's easier said than done, because grief is another thing that we'll talk about, I'm sure, at some point. And we've all been in a state of grief. And it's an interesting thing to go through when you lose a parent, or when you especially loss. Death is difficult for us because it's a recognition of, hey, this is ephemeral. I'm not going to be around.
Well, and I think it's harder on others. I think it's really harder on others based, again, on your beliefs. So, that belief is the key. Belief is the key. Absolutely. And until then, until that time may come, we will coexist together. Now, won't we?
I like the bumper sticker. I see it all over the place, the coexist, except it's always the guy who, blows your head off at the traffic light and says, "Hey, asshole, move, will you?" It's just like, love your coexist bumper sticker. Way to really back that up there.
I always love to see the coexist bumper sticker too, because then it always is followed by at least 3 or 4 different bumper stickers. They never stop at just one. If you have coexist, then you at least have 4 other bumper stickers on your vehicle.
So true. So true. At least, people with the coexist sticker, at least they're better than the coal rollers. I got behind one of those. They're going away, thankfully. It seems I don't see as many of them as I used to, but I'm not a personal believer in Hades or hell or any form of static reality where people go to gnash teeth and get punished for eternity. But if there was one to be created, I'd set it aside for the coal rollers. I really wouldn't. I don't mean that. But God, it's just like, wow. I mean, there's being a moron, and then there's rolling coal. I'm so whatever I think I am that I'm actually, going to purposefully, willfully contaminate the environment in front of everybody, because I don't believe that the environment is already contaminated. So this is my statement piece. I mean, it's like blowing cigarette smoke in your grandmother's face. They got watching her die of lung cancer.
I got to tell you, man, they got another thing coming. Thing coming.
Cue the Judas Priest.
I think it's time for us to cue the music and move on from our chrome soapbox and say until we meet again, folks. Jack Hansen, I always love our conversations.
Yes, I always enjoy coffee time with you as well. So we're going to go out with some sin today.
Ooh. Well, I guess they're going to kick us out of this place now, aren't they?
Yeah, they're kicking us out for being sinners.
What are we listening to?
Well, of course, we're listening to Sinner from our buddies Radioactive.
And where are they from?
I think they're from California. I don't know. It's like a group band. It's Tommy Denander's band.
Very cool. Well, until we meet again, Mr. Jack Hansen.
Been a pleasure. We'll do it again soon.
Well, it looks like Jack and Michael have finished up their latest chat about all things existence. But if anything they said got your own existence brewing, be sure and catch their other talks at existencebrewing.com and drop them an email to share your thoughts using contact@existencebrewing.com.
Existence Brewing.